We hope to close the transaction by the end of May, Memorial Day area. The rate limiting step right now is the City of New Brighton approving the transition. And there are two aspects of that transition. One is that Global Academy is not us, and the space has a special use permit for us to be here, for a seminary to be here. We had a special use permit that would allow up to 350 students, and they already have 100 more than that. So we need some changes to the special use permit there. And then we also need to subdivide the property because we are not selling the apartments. Our students will still have access to the apartments, and we will continue to manage the apartments in a collaborative way with Global Academy. So that's an important part. And so the city has to approve those two elements. Part of the city approving that is that our neighbors have to approve it. And as if any of you have done things with city approvals, neighbors can be questioning. I think that's the right word. So we're working through that. In terms of the process on campus itself, we have developed 4 committees, and these are inter-constituent committees. One of those committees is focused on the transition itself, saying goodbye to this space and welcoming to the new space. Okay, so how do we ceremonially recognize that we've been here and this space has meant a great deal to many people, and acknowledge that and value that. And then as we move into the new space, how do we do the same there to make that special and consecrated space through ceremony and meaningful. So there's a committee that's focused on that. A second committee is focused on the visioning for the new space. What should that space look like? What functionality does it need to have? What do students need to have to feel comfortable and effective in the space? And how should that look? What should that configuration look like? A third is focused on the student experience through the transition. How do we ensure that the transition is not interfering with students' education? They're not coming to school for a transition. They're coming to school to be seminarians. And how do we ensure that our transition is not interfering unnecessarily in their education? And then the fourth committee is logistics focused, making sure that we get from here to there, that we have the right configuration, the right build out, the right architects and builders and movers and all the happy stuff that goes into a transition. And we have leadership for each of those and a pretty good array of constituents in those. As I mentioned, we plan to move into the new space certainly for the early part of 2019 in time for the spring semester. So that's what I have to say, at least in terms of prepared remarks. Why don't we shift to questions and see where your thoughts are? Yes?
I think there may be more than a few of us who would like to, as volunteers, help with this. Is there a mechanism or are there thoughts in place about this?
Yep. So we can get you, if you call my office, we can connect you to, Gina can help connect to whichever committee sounds most effective for you. And yes.
And have we sort of made that invitation anywhere?
Yes, my understanding is in a few different places, the Monday morning has made the invitation. And there have been some other things on the website and other places. So that's at least my understanding. Yes, sir.
The status of the new space, is it solid, or are you going to need an interim space before you move into a final space? Or
we're hoping not for an interim space. We're hoping to move straight to the long-term space, although we recognize that long-term is not forever. So what we are looking at doing, we have identified a community that seems like it would be good for us along University Avenue in St. Paul, directly east of the U as you move into St. Paul all the way to Fairview or thereabouts. What we like about that area is several things. One is it's got good access to mass transit. Number two is there are quite a bit of development in that area and good spaces that would likely meet our needs. We found at least 3 spaces that we believe could meet our needs. Number 3 is it's a vibrant area. It's really in a development stage, which means that there are a lot of artists who are finding their way there. There are a lot of nonprofits finding their way there, all missionally consistent, and so that general area feels really good. We have, go ahead. Sound like there's a question after the question.
Well, it sounds like we don't have a space yet.
No. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is we have RFPs out to places we believe would be appropriate. Number 2 is until the transaction closes on the sale, we do not want to commit to another space. Our wallets are not deep enough. So it is sequential, and we believe that this transaction will close, and we believe that our buyer is very committed. We've seen good evidence that they're very committed. But I will know it's done when it's done. And so I don't want to sign something for a new space until it's done. Does that make sense? Yes, ma'am.
One of the things that some of us really value here at UTS was a sense of community. And the gathering places that we had in the old cafe before it was the Contacts Cafe. What's our name for that? Anybody remember? You know what I'm talking about, that old place? The place was kind of grubby.
Friendly.
And friendly, thank you, it was friendly.
Grubby and friendly, we'll work on that.
The reality is, I'm so old, the thought of online education to me is just, I'm a face-to-face person.
Sure.
But how are you gonna juggle that? The need for some people, and maybe all young people now, are just fine with online stuff. Maybe they don't need face-to-face stuff. But how are you gonna juggle all that?
So we're working on that, and let me kind of drill into that in a few different ways. First off, we have heard over and over and over again the single biggest meaningful aspect of seminary education for most seminarians, or many seminarians, is that interactive nature, their cohort, their interaction with faculty and with their fellow seminarians, and that those are lasting relationships that have deep, meaningful importance. And we want to ensure that, whether it be the library or various areas of the space that we create, has good areas for that kind of interaction. Even when this space was originally conceptualized, when you walk out of the classrooms, there are those little windowed areas in front of the doors of the classroom. And the original architect's vision was that people would come out of class and stand there where we now have art to have conversation about what they just worked with. Well, if I can drill in, though, on the distance education students, we too have struggled with how do you provide good seminary education to students on a distance model. And where we have struggled, or where we have worried most, is in the formational context. So we don't question whether or not students can learn academically in a distance model. There's good evidence that it works, and some students can do that effectively. And we have, in fact, moved from a sort of disconnected model of distance education to one where our students are actually in the classroom just through video monitors. So instead of the traditional distance education was you signed on to the internet whenever you had time, you read whatever the lecture was in a written form, and you interacted in some non-contiguous way. Distance education has evolved some to where students who are on a distance model are actually in the classroom just through a monitor. But the area that we have been most worried about is that of formation. How do you do theological formation with someone through a monitor? And how do you know the progress when you don't have those face-to-face interactions? Our former dean, Sharon Tan, applied for a innovation grant from the ATS, which we were granted. And we are currently working with them. And the model of the grant is to do narrative work with students on a distance education way, to allow them to do some of that formational work and allow professors and our formational team to interact with them and understand really what kind of progress are they making. We don't know if it'll work. We believe it has promise. We believe it has more promise than hoping. And so we're going to go down that path, and early indications are that it has, some good impact for many. But we are not going to go to a fully online model until we know that we can do that work effectively. And this is a path that may have some merit. Does that make sense? Okay. Sure.
In your recent letters to us, you've assured us that you will honor our history. Two elements of our history that are very important to me is a permanent collection of art and the papers that are in the courtyard. Will these move with us?
Yes. Absolutely. Yeah. Yes, I'm sorry. So the issue, the question was, there are things about our history that are really important. Two of those things are our art collection, and the second are the pavers that folks have paid for outside this space. And will those come with us? And the answer is yes, we will take those with us and try to embed them into the new space in a way that's meaningful, as well as other things. So we also, those were the two you asked about, but there are many named rooms in this organization that we want to respect, and the other aspects of both gifts and elements that we want to bring with us. So, yes.
Some of us here have memories that go back to the 60s for the early formation. And I recall at that time that there was some embarrassment about being here in a relatively affluent suburb when we were imagining ourselves as a seminary that was an urban seminary that was to serve the city. And so there's a sense in which what is happening now has been at least generatively in the thoughts of people for half a century. But I think that for people who are a little more distant from the process, it can look like the first step out. And so you were talking earlier about marketing. And I guess this is less a question and more a statement, but it seems like it would be very important to somehow tie into that history of being an urban seminary and what you talked about and this space gives, and confirming again and again that it's not the first step out of existence.
I just want to put an underline and exclamation point to that. I've been in this role for a little over, I'm going on 2 years. And I care a great deal about this seminary and the financial viability of this seminary, the vibrancy of this seminary. We are in better financial shape today than we have been for many years. I was on the board of trustees for 8 years before I was president here. And we have been through some complex times financially. We are not, no seminary can honestly say, good times, not that kind of business. But I can tell you that we are vibrant, that we are seeing growth in students, and that this is in no way a step towards an end. If anything, this is a step towards a reimagining of who we can be and who we are. So I thank you for that question, and I just want to be very clear. Some of the most painful calls I get, or letters I get, are statements that say, we know this is really about finances. Obviously, any organization worries about finances, so everything has finances tied to it. But this is not a decision because we're failing financially. This is a decision because we're succeeding financially, and the vibrancy of the institution requires an urban presence and other things that I've talked about. So thank you for that question. I think you had a question.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I really appreciated having that information as well. But my greatest concern is how space enhances and forms, and for ministry especially. So it's good to hear all that. But my question is much more mundane, but it has to do with
I
this
love
space.
mundane.
Two things. The new space, is there, what's the square footage of that? I just want that compared to what we have here.
We're aiming at about 25,000 square feet.
25,000, okay. And is there any green space?
In 2 of the 3 spaces we've looked at, yes. Okay. In one of those spaces, there is a patio off of the floor that would be green space. Let me just be clear. Potential for gardens. Okay, so it's off the ground. So, and then the second is built around a courtyard, which has green growth in it. So we value that. Oh, and the third space that doesn't have it is half a block or less than half a block from a community garden. So they are urban, and we are making that decision to go to the urban setting, but in all cases, they're urban with a context of green space.
Part of the reason I ask that is the importance of green space, the importance of nature, the importance of creation in the formation of our spirituality and our own health and wellness.
Absolutely agree. Yes, sir.
I want to pick up on the urban seminary,
Okay.
but remind us about our rural roots. I have a degree in urban studies. I was 25 years in urban ministry. I finished my ministry in rural Iowa. And the rural church, the church that I served, was one of the most challenging, one of the most satisfying aspects of experiences in my ministry. And let us not abandon the rural church and recognize that the rural communities are undergoing, because of urbanization, dramatic and significant change. It needs to be ministered to and with, if you will. I'd be interested in the statistics now, but many seminary graduates go first to rural churches.
Right.
So we need to equip people to minister in rural communities.
Right. So let me frame that, because I don't think I was certainly not intending to imply that we're abandoning.
Fill out the
Right.
conversation.
What I think is important is that the model of training historically was a very cloistered model, okay, where you removed yourself from the general populace, and in that context did the work you needed to do, and as a result, seminaries were built relatively isolated from interactive community. Okay? The push right now is that people want to be in seminary, in community, in interaction. And in New Brighton, as wonderful a community as it is, we are this little cloistered seminary between these streets. We do not interact with our neighbors. We do not walk outside and see them. We are kind of in our little world, and they are in their little world. And so when we talk about being in a more urban setting, what we're talking about is walking out of our door and being in community, being interactive. And so that is not intended to say we don't care about all church. That makes sense.
That makes sense, but it doesn't answer the rural issue. How are you going to prepare some students for ministry in rural communities?
Well, and I think the true answer is contextual education still occurs. So we do contextual education in all settings. We send students to urban churches, rural churches, chaplaincy programs all over. So we certainly have always had an appreciation for all churches in that context. So I don't see that part of the curriculum changing. Yes, sir.
Well, this conversation is stirring up my memories of when I was here. We had a bookstore downstairs called the TBA, the Theological Book Agency, that was down there. And when I came here, there were 65 students, all males, 13 faculty, all males. And so we got together in this male club. And we had a ping pong table, so you could ping and pong your way through your training that was going up on the upstairs. And you could always go to escape to the library if you really were a bookworm. And so what came out of where I'm at with all of this is it was somewhere, it was a coffee house downstairs. And they didn't serve Starbucks in Caribou, but you got an interesting contrast between Starbucks up in heaven and Caribou out in the forest and on the field. So how do you weave that into this iteration of rural, urban, and suburban context? You know, so the context cafe came along, and I always find the X part interesting in context. So this is how my mind works in this three-story universe that we're letting go of to move to a something, you know, structural that will capture that kind of male phase versus opening up to more females versus males. And now we're coming to this. I'm fond of formation more than formation. Formation is how do you nurture living things like plants, animals, people. And formation is kind of a military, intellectual, logical way of forming faith, which is good. But getting to underneath all of that is what I bring from the farm. My father was a farmer, my mother was a gardener. And so I grew up between Swiss German and Polish German. My father's favorite phrase was, give them hell. You didn't give them anybody. It was my mother's job. So I grew up between them and how they prepared me to go out and live on earth somehow. Anyway, just go listen to the conversation.
Sure. You know, I think what we're trying to do is bring the skills of seminary work to folks who want to go to seminary. And we're trying to bring those together. And it's sort of, I think there's a good parallel between those of you in parish ministry who are trying to bring the word to people in today's world. Okay, and sometimes that works exactly the way it did when we were growing up, and sometimes it has to be framed in a little bit different way. And the question is, are we creative enough to make the word resonate with today's young people and today's students? And I think what I see as my job is to say we don't want to lose the good of 2,000 years of education around the Gospels, but we also want to be responsive to students who have had a cell phone in their hand since they were 5 years old and don't find our talking heads quite as interesting as we did. And so finding that balance, not losing the good, but finding the way to engage today's student and tomorrow's student. I'm sorry, Phil.
Can I just respond to the rural-urban divide, just with a student example? So, without sharing too much information, we just admitted a student who is located in semi-rural Colorado, and he did extensive experience on all the UCC seminaries he could go to. He is deeply embedded in the Colorado Conference of the UCC. He is UCC as they come. And he really wanted to be part of this community, and he's going to be part of this community as a distance student. He sees his ability to continue to serve his UCC church as a faith formation leader in semi-rural Colorado as being totally doable and in sync with being part of this community. So I think that distance education is one of the ways that we will continue to serve people who are in rural areas, who we may not have even been able to serve before because now they can't really pick up and leave and move. Increasingly, one of the reasons for people doing distance education is their inability to extricate themselves from their own lives, and also the increase in the reality that multiple people have to work at home to make ends meet. So it's a lot harder to have one. It's a lot harder to have one salary position in Rapid, South Dakota, with any kind of family other than yourself. So distance education is one of the ways that we are kind of doubling down on not only doing formation, but trying to continue to serve populations that we haven't been able to serve. And the relocation to a new specific location doesn't change that. If anything, it will enhance our opportunity to do that through better technology. So I hope that's helpful, at least for the first one.
Thank you.
So on June 1st, you're going to walk away with $5.1 million in your pocket?
7.
7? Okay, so the article was incorrect in the newspaper? I thought it was 5.5.
I think it said 5.5, and there's a piece that they pay a little bit later that's about $250,000. So ultimately, it's 5.75.
So that I understand the way that this deal is going to be structured is that Global Academy will not own the property. It's some kind of holding company, or
Right.
so the money is coming through this other agency.
Right.
And is that a for-profit, a non-profit? But who is actually buying the property?
So
I'm
Oh,
sorry.
the question is, who actually is buying the property?
Oh.
Who's coming up with the money?
as I understand it, the way the charter school laws exist, they can't buy property as the charter school directly. So they create a separate entity that structures the financing to buy their properties. And that's the same. Now, St. Thomas University is the sponsor for Global Academy. Everyone has a sponsor, and it's St. Thomas. I don't know the status. Maybe Peter, do you know the status of that entity?
The entity is a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Academy. The entity that's buying the campus is a separate entity, but that entity is a wholly owned subsidiary of Global Academy.
Okay. So their wholly owned subsidiary can buy the property, but they cannot.
Correct.
So they'll have a lease arrangement for it.
Exactly.
Okay.
They're leasing from themselves, in fact.
Okay. So the money is coming from Global Academy.
Yeah.
Not some other.
Well,
entity.
in bank loans. I mean, they're
Okay.
financing a portion of the purchase.
Well, I'm just curious, since there are a lot of moving parts.
Right.
And the largest moving part is this money.
Right.
So I was interested in how that was being structured.
And we've done some due diligence. The Global Academy has been paying more to the strip mall owner for their current space than they would need to pay for a mortgage. So there's reason to believe that they have the cash flow to actually make this work. And we'll know pretty quickly because they need to write the check. I'm sorry.
That's okay. I just would like to clarify. Other times I've heard the reason for this taking place was financial. And yeah, I heard that. But I just want to clarify that my understanding is that for UTS to do what it wants to do going into the future, it would cost too much to make those changes in this building.
There's truth to that.
And that, that's the financial piece that maybe I was misunderstanding from before. The reason being that it was financial.
So let me try to address it, just for those who may not have heard it. What she's heard is that this must be financial. And just trying to understand what parts of this are financial. And I think the best way I can describe this is to say, what are we going to do with the money? When they write us that check, how are we going to use that check? Okay? What we intend to do with that money is to not spend it. Okay? What we intend to do with that money is to put it in an investment account and use the returns on that investment account, the 4% or whatever comes off of that, as operating dollars for us to lease space or to do whatever. Where I would differentiate between if we were doing this purely to survive and we needed that 5.5 million, that 5.75 million to survive and to extend our life, we would spend down on that amount. But what we intend to do is to ensure our long-term success by using that as an investment, having it improve our liquidity, because with that comes, there's no restrictions on how we can use it, so we can invest it and live on the returns from that. So to me, the difference is if we were intending to spend down the 5.5, and so to say, all right, we have this deficit, and every year we're going to use a few $100,000 of that to live on, and ultimately that'll last us 10 years or whatever that is. That to me would be both a downward spiral and a truly financial driver. And I think it's important to us that we not do that. That's not our intent. Does that make sense?
So, does the money go into an endowment fund, a restricted fund, or a board-designated fund? What kind of financial structure will that be? And the decisions, I would take it if it's a board designated, this money will be designated by the board, but not with specific restrictions?
Correct. So the way I would say it is, when we have restricted aspects of our endowment, it's for a specific purpose, for scholarships or for this or for that. This will have no restrictions that way, but it will absolutely be directed by the board. And the intent is to use it as, it does two things for us. One is it adds liquidity, and the second thing it does is it gives us returns in which we can live.
And will any of the money go towards leasehold improvements in the place, or is that all going to be, I mean, is some of the money going to be used for actual build-out and the cost of occupancy?
If you mean, is any of the 5.5 million going towards that, the answer is no.
Okay, so that's all covered by...
Right. Now, it's our hope that the agreement we cut will allow for some build-out, on others' time, but it's our intent to know. Yes.
I may be inferring something totally different or wrong, but I'm inferring from what you're just saying now that there's a possibility that the new space will be a rental space rather than a purchase. Is
Correct.
that correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
And let me speak to the why.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, I'm sorry. The question was, she's inferring from what I'm saying that we may be leasing space instead of buying. And the answer to your question is, you're absolutely correct. And the logic is, it will likely be a 7 to 10 year lease because we want the landlord to do some of the build out, but we also want the fluidity to respond to what's next, what are the next needs. So we may grow and need 50,000 square feet, and that would take us in one direction, or we may find that we need a different kind of space. So what we don't want to do is be so locked in, same kind of thing that we faced here. My sense is some of my colleagues would have advocated for a move some 10 years ago, but for a whole host of reasons that was complicated. And I don't want that same kind of challenge. So, yes, you're right. Go ahead.
Well, it's a little different question, but will you still be working with multiple denominations?
Yes.
And their restrictions and things that they require? And will you be continuing hybrid courses for at least a while until either the denominations no longer have a restriction on no online courses, or, I'm talking about the United Methodist.
Yes.
Okay.
I knew who you meant.
I know, I don't want you to lose all of those United Methodist
Nor-
students, and so I'm just asking, are you going to continue hybrid courses for at least a while?
Yes. So just for those who may not have heard, the question is, are we going to continue to be an ecumenical seminary, and will we continue to do what it takes to engage all denominations that of the past? And the answer is yes. It is our intention to remain ecumenical. We have been in communication with each of the denominations and are in active communication. And what's interesting is at least one senior leader of a denomination and one bishop both sent me a note that said, I'd love to use this as a model for some of our churches. Churches that are very locked into their physical plant instead of their mission. And this is a good example for our churches. So, thank you. Yeah.
Can I just speak to the hybrid question? The answer is yes. We have identified the requisite number of courses that were required to have a percentage of our courses that are taken by distance students be available to them to take face-to-face. So that's the hybrid model rather than the fully distance model. So we've identified the courses that we need to offer both to satisfy our creditors in terms of offering residential education to those distance students, but also to satisfy the expectations requirements of UMC and other denominations that still have that expectation of face-to-face. So that's built into our curriculum model as one of our options.
Do you have a question?
Yes. Are accurate numbers about the current enrollment for full-time, part-time, and those that have, in the last 5 years, maybe come, gone, transferred, or dropped out, available? I worked in admissions in a proprietary school in one of my past lives, and having graduated last May and lived through the 2015 sudden downsizing, or right-sizing, as it was being called, it was told to us students that it was for financial reasons. So I am hoping that since then, some wonderful donors have just piled money in here. But my admissions brain is going into a database and looking for some reasons, because I know other seminaries have closed at 100 students or less, such as Meg or Maine. I'm just looking for some answers, because I get into these discussions in Omaha with alumni and conference ministers and people wondering, and I don't have any data. Might have video, but I'm just saying, I just don't have anything to go on to assure them, because we're all kind of speculating. Everybody's speculating.
The question is, how can she trust that we have what it takes to be successful? And the answer is, it's trust. There is, our census of students has continued to go in a positive direction. We're continuing to hire staff and faculty into key positions. Our faculty have never been more engaged, at least in the 2 years I've been here. They're excited, they're offering new classes. Our staff are similarly engaged. We are a seminary in good shape. And I think part of what gets seminaries upside down economically is the maintenance on their buildings. And I think this is an important next step for us. Thanks.
One other thought I had, you reminded me of, was at the churches where I attend sometimes. And about 2 months ago, we're talking about when did the word church come into existence? And it was Pentecost, where the disciples were scattered, and they were talking in tongues, and they were dispersed. And so that was a very important transition that was going on from being centered in Galilee and so forth to Jesus being there. So it seems like there's a Pentecostal breakthrough here to a new way to form outposts of smaller church groups that can, carry on that tradition of being churches scattered, speaking different tongues, coming in different colors, and being global witnesses to that. So it seems like a very timely thing to actualize. So, sure. But it's true.
Yeah. I'm sure those sitting around the Pentecost were a little disturbed too. I know it's getting late. If there are no other questions, thank you all.
I just have a really quick one, and
Please.
I'm pretty sure I know the answer to this,
Okay.
but just because I've had a couple people already ask me about this, I want to make sure that I come away from this with this answer. United is giving up all, usage of this space, right? We're not going to use the chapel or have some special agreement where we use the chapel for certain things or things like that, right?
Correct.
We're totally okay.
Yeah.
Just
So,
to make sure.
Yeah, just to be absolutely clear, we are keeping the apartments. And we will continue to have students in those apartments. And we will continue to do things with Global Academy because we see our missions as being so integrated. They have offered to call this space Bigelow Hall, so they're being respectful of various aspects, but it will be a secular space.
This is just a quick observation, sort of the word on the street, so to speak, is it seems like this chapel space is going to be the hardest space for most of us to let go of. And I know I sort of got a little grief already started because this is such a special space.
No question.
And it would be great to honor that. I'm sure there are plans to honor that as we move forward.
Absolutely. And we do honor it. And I can tell you it was regularly the most painful part of coming to this conclusion. But at the end of the day, it was a balancing of what's best for the seminary with what's hard to do. And I think we all honor that. So thank you. Again, thank you all for your time. I appreciate it. I know it's gone a little long, but thank you for being here. Thanks.